And now, this is the moment you've all been waiting for, which has had me on the edge of my seat the entire way through this process. Are you ready for this? I hope you are sitting down. What you are voting for, in capitals note, is UK sovereignty. You are voting to stay in or leave a political union of leaders and representatives that you British people did not elect. You are voting against a commission of unelected elite men that nobody at all voted for, and yet they make decisions on our behalf. You are simply voting to bring sovereignty back to Westminster, and that is all. Right, I'm going to try and be brief. I'm probably going to fail. It's good to see that finally there's this admittance that we are voting to stay in or leave. Because throughout all of this has been the presumption we are leaving. And now finally we get, well, you could choose the other way. But what you are voting for is UK sovereignty. Right, you are voting against Commission of Unelected Elite Men. I love the fact that we have to put in this thing that's sort of been sewn into all of our brains, that the establishment is old white men, elite men. Yes, often it is, and this is not a good thing, but thankfully we are seeing more women, more of a gender balance in politics. It will take time to balance out, but the sooner the better, obviously. However, a political union of leaders that we British people did not elect. Well, I didn't elect or vote for an MP in the Newcastle area any more than somebody from Newcastle had a vote on the MP for where I am. I actually did not vote for my MP, but I live in a safe Conservative seat. And my MP is diametrically opposed to everything I stand for. So I have absolutely no voice in the UK Parliament. And if that's democracy, then, find me another concept. The EU is made up, and I suggest you go and read this because I can't encapsulate it all blathering over a slideshow in a few minutes. But there are elected MEPs, there are representatives of each nation's democratically elected governments. There is the equivalent of the civil service, which is the equivalent of the civil service. In terms of democracy, it's really certainly no less democratic than the UK, and in many respects it's actually vastly more democratic. The argument is, however, that it's democratically elected by people over a much more widespread area, the EU. Now, I would say that I personally don't see that as any less democratic than Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland being ruled by policies predominantly made in the middle of England. Well, the south-ish middle of England in London. I wouldn't see it as any less democratic than what used to be called the West Lothian question, where there were a lot of Scottish MPs who would vote with the UK government on issues that actually didn't affect Scotland. We coped with these because overall it's the will of the combined people. The EU is no less democratic in that respect. So the way it's structured, you have your MEPs. I've already sort of glossed over this very quickly. You have your MEPs and you have your representatives who are nominated by each member state, and each member state has to be a democratic country. So the democratically elected government of this country nominates a representative for this country, as well as our MEPs, who, may I point out, in the case of Nigel Farage for UKIP, when he's busy buddying up to fishermen, didn't actually attend 42 out of 43 EU meetings on fishing policy in his job as an MEP. So, again, we want to talk about representation and democracy. We need to be looking at who hasn't even bothered turning up for his democratic duties at work. Rant over. So, yeah, when you look at the structure of the EU, it definitely is accountable, it definitely is democratic. However, of course, it is combining and covering the interests of 28 nations. So you could say, well, should something that's relevant to them really matter to us? We have a veto. We have a lot of power and a lot of sway and influence in the EU. So we do actually get to say, oh, we don't really like that, we don't want that, and stop the whole EU from having something. If anything, we're a little bit more sovereign. All countries are sovereign, but some are more sovereign than others in our case in the EU. We blocked proposals that would have probably helped our steel industry, because we decided it wasn't in our best trade interest with China to do so in the EU. We have got in the way of various tax powers for corporation tax to stop the likes of Google from getting away with what they've gotten away with. And I don't blame Google for 1 minute for doing what they've done, because who wouldn't go, oh, you want 4 billion or 400 million or 10 million? Let's pick a number. Can we get away with paying you about 1/10 of what we should? That'll do. You know, do you want some tickets to the Super Bowl? Who wouldn't if they could? With the vast amounts of money that are being talked about. The EU have wanted to bring in more powers for investigating this sort of tax evasion and for making sure it happens less, so that companies pay what they should. We're the ones that kind of got in the way of that happening. So we have a lot of power in the EU. And things that we might like to blame the EU for, it often turns out we're actually us stopping them from doing it or pushing them into doing it. Then that's a democratically elected government doing that, by the way. Also, in terms of sovereignty, the EU is a collection of countries working together for common standards and common civil rights. Ultimately, that's what it is. Every country can make its own laws about this, that, and the other. We just have to share a core set of values, which really aren't much. You know, it's the human rights stuff. It's the, you know, no imprisoning without cause or trial. It's, you know, don't stab people. It's don't lock people up, don't stab them. Don't force them to work 100 hours a week. You know, treat them as people. That's really something that we all share. So if you want to talk the sovereignty issue, then, you know, we've chosen to share an element of sovereignty, which frankly is for the greater good of the people. Alongside that, people go on about so many laws being made in Europe and this, that, and the other. They're really things like food safety standards, electrical safety standards, just product safety standards, consumer protections. And the reason we have those is because it means that when you make a toaster in this country, you're making it to a standard that it's deemed to be safe for use in any other country in the single market, and vice versa. It's so that you can't just make something with the wires half exposed falling off that's going to electrocute somebody on first use. It's so that we can have a common set of standards, a common set of core values of production qualities and human rights. I don't see that as a bad thing. Anything we sign up to is going to have conditions, and conditions are going to mean we have to abide by and do or not do certain things. If you want complete sovereignty, we cannot actually sign up to anything international, because there will always be this trade-off of we choose to share power, we choose to share an element of our sovereignty, for want of a better word, with this other country. And if you look through history, England, Britain has seldom ever been completely sovereign. For many years, it was under the guidance, shall we say, of the Holy Roman Empire, the Catholic Church. Henry VIII got a little bit disgruntled about this. However, he then had to go on to make pacts with various nations. If you look at certain elements of his marriages, then to an extent they were political, as royal marriages have always been. They were political to kind of unite and form treaties with other countries. And so this continued throughout time. We've always had pacts and treaties and agreements. And any time you have an agreement, the agreement goes along the lines of, we agree not to do this or to let you have a bit of that, and you agree not to do that or to let us have a bit of this. That's how these things work. So ultimate sovereignty is a great sort of rallying call when you're trying to get a support for something like a war, basically. It's a fantastic way of uniting the people behind you. But actually, behind closed doors, there's probably no such thing as a completely sovereign state, apart from possibly North Korea. And I'm not convinced that we should be desperately trying to sort of race to the bottom and beat North Korea in the sovereignty stakes. I'm trying to think what I haven't covered on this, because this is their big reveal, and so obviously this one deserves a lot of time, which I've now given it. Really, overall, we have control over everything, because also ultimately we can just say no. We allow an element of our governance to be shared with the EU in exchange for membership of the EU. If we left the EU, we would still have to share elements. We're members of the UN, and they are currently investigating and not very happy with the way disabled people have been treated in our welfare reforms. They can do that because we agree to abide by certain conditions as members of the UN. So sovereignty sounds great. You know, I'm British, I want my own government and my own laws. When you actually look into it, though, we have all of that. We have all of that and cooperation with others. It's not really an either-or situation. So, to me, I was born English, in Britain, in Europe. I consider myself all three of these things. And I don't feel that sovereignty is under threat because there's a democratically representative body in the in and forming the European Union that makes sure the food I eat isn't laden with carcinogens. I don't see it as against the sovereignty of the country I was born in and live in and vote in, etc. If when I go to buy something, it has a CE mark on it that guarantees it's not going to lacerate me when I open the packaging. I'm fairly happy with this situation, because when you look at what it means, sovereignty is a great word that doesn't really stand up to the scrutiny of the modern age or of history. I could probably say more, but it's basically going over the same points. For me, when you to wrap it up and to summarise, when you actually look at what sovereignty means and what sovereignty we have in this country, you will see that we have sovereignty to no lesser extent than probably any other Western first world democracy.